Late in the 16th century, the Mughal Emperor Akbar was troubled by a question: what's the original language of human beings? He had a hypothesis that babies raised without hearing speech would be unable to speak. In order to test his hypothesis, he ordered that 12 newborn babies be put in a remote place called the Gung Mahal, or the Palace of the Mute. He made sure that the babies get everything that they need except human speech. To make the experiment free from any error, only mute nurses were selected to feed the babies. Years passed by and the subjects of the experiment, the babies, ate, played, and grew older. Few years later, Emperor Akbar went to the palace and found out that none of the children spoke. Instead, they conversed only in signs. Akbar's hypothesis seemed to be supported: no oral input, no oral language learning. But many accounts of Akbar's experiment miss the most interesting point. The mute nurses likely conversed with each other in signs. They must have communicated with the infants in signs, and the children must have developed a kind of sign language. So although Akbar was right in predicting that the children would not learn an oral language, it seemed likely that they did in fact learn or create a sign language, either from normal sign input from the mute nurses or by further developing a rudimentary sign language used by the caregivers. Other versions of this experiment are recorded in history, like the ones conducted by the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik and by King James I of England, but none of these are as historically reliable as Akbar's. Now obviously, the experiment seems cruel and unethical, as 12 human babies were devoid of language as a direct result of this experiment. But it could also be seen as a rare historical example of an inquisitive king having scientific temper who just wanted to find out answers to one of the most relevant questions concerning humanity. Tell us in the comments what you think about this. If you want to support our work, you can do that by subscribing to our channel and sharing our videos to others. Some scholars have called this kind of speech deprivation experiment as the forbidden experiment because of the exceptional deprivation of ordinary human contact it requires. Anyway, as it turns out from Akbar's experiment, our original language was a sign language. But it still doesn't answer the question: which language is the language we all are naturally supposed to speak in, or which language would we have spoken if we had not grown up hearing our mother tongue? Let's look into a similar experiment conducted by Psamtik, the Egyptian pharaoh. We know about it from the writings of the Greek historian Herodotus, who was born 200 years after the pharaoh. He writes in his book, The Histories, that Psamtik carried out such a study involving isolated babies and concluded that the now extinct Phrygian language must have been human beings' original language, since a child in the experiment had first spoken something similar to the Phrygian word bikos, meaning bread. Phrygian was an ancient language spoken by the people of Phrygia, which was located in the Anatolian region of present-day Turkey. This language went extinct 1500 years ago. Recent research suggests that the result of Psamtik experiment was most likely a willful interpretation of child's babbling. The child might have simply babbled something which was taken as a similar sounding Phrygian word. Long after this experiment, James IV of Scotland was said to have sent 2 children to be raised by a mute woman, isolated on the island of Inchkeith, to determine if language was learned or inborn. The children were reported to have spoken good Hebrew, but historians were doubtful of these claims soon after they were made. So basically, all of these experiments have either turned out having an ambiguous outcome or have proven to be fabricated. From a biblical perspective, Prophet Adam, the first human being, spoke the Adamic language, which was the language spoken by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. This language is believed to be either the language used by God to address Prophet Adam, the divine language, or the language invented by Prophet Adam with which he named all the things, including Eve, as in the creation narrative found in Genesis chapter 2, verse 19. In the Middle Ages, various Jewish commentators held that Prophet Adam spoke the Hebrew language, which many Jews believe is the oldest language. Apart from Hebrew, existing languages like Sanskrit, Aramaic, Tamil, Arabic, and Chinese are all reasonable candidates for being called the oldest language. The Islamic tradition holds that Prophet Adam knew all the languages. The Quran mentions in chapter 2, verse 31, "And he taught Adam all the names, then presented them to the angels. Then he said, 'Tell me the names of those if you are right.'" The forbidden experiment occurs in Paul Auster's The New York Trilogy, where one of the characters was made to become a subject to the forbidden experiment. In the Twilight Zone episode, Mute, the episode deals with a young girl raised to communicate only through telepathy, and her struggles after the sudden death of her parents forces her to enter mainstream society.